Senator, thank you so much for joining us today. Now that House Bill 93 has passed, what are your education priorities for the rest of the legislative session?
Well, thank you for having me. And we've got quite a few education priorities. First of all, we're working on the funding formula. We know that that funding formula is antiquated. It hasn't been updated in years, and so, but it's complicated and it's very complex, so we're looking at taking a few bites at a time. And so the first one is to look at sending out some of the money based on students' needs. So students that have special needs students might need more resources, or if it's a English language learner might need some more resources. So we're looking at that, weighting the students and sending out some of the money, not all of it, but some of it. That's kind of a first step.
And for people who aren't familiar, the funding formula when we're talking about education is how much money the state sends to school districts, and it's right now based on average daily attendance as opposed to enrollment or student needs.
Right, and during the pandemic we went to enrollment. And that was, I think that it reflects what schools need more accurately, because if a student's absent, the costs don't go down. You still have the teacher, the building's, has to be heated, lights are on, buses run, so the costs don't go down because somebody's absent. But we used to have about a 98% attendance rate before COVID or before the pandemic. And since then, we're running in the high 80s, like 89% or 92%. So we have the same number of students, but we're sending out less money to school districts because of the average daily attendance.
And we know that chronic absenteeism, based on how many students, how many days a student misses in a school year, that can also vary district by district. Do we know the causes why that's going down right now?
I think just parents and students got used to, if you're sick, you stay home. And, sometimes if you have a little sniffle, you go to school, or we used to. And now it's like, oh, we need to stay home. And I think it's just more of a response to how people dealt with colds and stuff during the pandemic and how they do it now.
Sure. You also have a bill concerning public schools potentially transforming to charter schools.
Right. I think it's time to level the playing field for traditional public schools and public charter schools. And right now, traditional public schools don't have the same flexibility that charter schools do. So if we really want to move the needle, then let's kind of level that playing field. Let's allow them to have more flexibility with their curriculum and with the reporting that they provide the state, and also just the idea that we can be innovative and creative in the public schools too. We'd originally thought, charter schools would be the incubators, and then we would bring those ideas back to the public schools. But in reality, what has happened is we've just had more and more charter schools. And so I think it's time to let public traditional schools be innovative.
And for people who aren't familiar, what is the difference between a charter school that receives public funding and a traditional public K through 12 school?
Well, a charter school can take who they want. They can't really discriminate, but they have a lottery. They don't have to necessarily run all the programs. They don't have to do breakfast and lunch and maybe not even transportation. They can, but and they don't have to do special ed. They can, but those things are a little different. And because they can't pass a bond or levy, they get facilities money, and they get more money per student allocated than the traditional schools get. And the thinking behind that was, well, a traditional school can pass a levy or a bond. But the reality right now is a lot of areas can't pass a levy or a bond. People's property taxes are high, and they just aren't willing to put that on their property tax.
And as you mentioned before, charter schools also have more flexibility with what kind of curriculum they can offer
Right.
and the reporting that they submit to the State Department of Education.
Yeah, if you're high performing, then you don't have to do all the reporting that a traditional public school does. And you know, there's lots of other things. They don't have to do sports programs. They may not have to have speech therapy, you know, provided, all those things. So there's a lot of costs that traditional schools endure that may not be included in a public charter school. However, they do have to do quite a bit of work with facilities.
And this bill passed the Senate unanimously last month.
It did. I was really excited about that because I really think people are seeing that we need to allow the same opportunities to be innovative to traditional public schools that we allow to public charter schools.
And it still needs to make it through the House. We'll keep an eye on that.
It does. I heard it's being held at the desk of the Speaker, but I'm hoping he'll release it soon.
We still have a lot of session left, I think.
Right.
So, you, in addition to Senate Education, you also sit on the Joint Finance Appropriations Committee. Can you give us some insight into how discussions are going over public school budget setting?
I can. We finally, just yesterday, set the revenue projection, which is usually done very early in the session, but the last 2 years we've waited. And that is of concern to me because we've passed a lot of bills. We've done tax cuts or revenue reduction before we even knew what we were going to need. And that's not how I would do my budget at home. I'd say, okay, here's the money I have, here's the bills I have, and do we have money left over? If so, let's give it back to the people. But we didn't do it that way. So now we're looking at the revenues have come in January and February below our projections. So we're looking at maybe some problem areas, partly because a lot of the federal grant money is kind of stalled. A lot of the federal programs are kind of on hold. We don't know how that's going to equate here in Idaho with what our needs are. We know that we're going to need firefighters, you know, federal ones this summer. We know that the universities, all of their research grants are stalled. So that's problematic. So you know, there may be some backfilling of those budgets. And so we're waiting for policy pieces. We're waiting to see what happens with the federal government and the funding we receive from them. And then I think we're getting closer, but we've got a lot of unknowns right now.
Another unknown is what's going to happen with the Department of Education in D.C. on that federal level. What concerns you about these conversations about dismantling the Department of Education?
Well, we haven't always had a Department of Education. It was created by the Congress, so it would take a vote by senators, I think 60, to say we're going to dismantle it or just, you know, do away with it. However, I think President Trump will probably try to do it without that, and we'll see what happens. But I think there are some areas we'd be fine. I think the IDEA, which is the it's the Individual Disabilities Education Act, and it's the money that we get for special education or for any child with a disability. And some of that intervention starts very early, and a lot of times it's for our preemies, you know, our babies that are born premature, or if they have some kind of disability, we jump right in. That program allows for that. I think we could do that at the state level with like block grants.
Using federal money potentially.
Yes. I think the state could take that over and just get the money from the federal government in a grant form, and we could do that. There are some areas I'm concerned about. I'm concerned about Title I, that's money that goes to our lower poverty areas. It's for free and reduced lunch. It's to help children that might be experiencing homelessness and things like that. So that, I don't know if those funds would be safe. And I'm very worried about our loans for students going on to college. Federal Pell Grants, federal loans. That's, that's a big program. It's basically done, FAFSA does it, and it's we have everybody's income tax, we look at that. It's done on a need basis. I don't know if we have the bandwidth or the capability to do that at the state level.
Right. Senator Janie Ward Engelking, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much.